3 aircraft carrier strike groups are in the Central Command area of responsibility. Does the massive air bridge that's also in place currently indicate coercive maneuvers or preparation, in your view, sir, of the next phase of conflict? The force buildup that has been underway now for some time is effectively complete, and I think they are now postured to resume the war if they are ordered to do so. And at the moment, I see no evidence that we will not resume the attack against Iran. Your impression is that in case President Trump orders, the forces are now prepared to launch the next phase of offensive in Iranian lawmaker Ibrahim Raisi. He has hit out at Rawalpindi or Islamabad, saying that 2 align to the interests of Washington, D.C. You in the past have described the Pakistan-mediated talks as fiction with no evidence of Iranian interest. Now, were these talks a hoax for the U.S. to build up for the next round? I think that the talks were always designed to buy time, and in the hopes, I think, on one side that there would be some negotiation or some talks with the Iranians, and on the other, if there were no talks, that then we could attack. We have not been communicating directly with the Iranians at all. And I think the Pakistanis have been under great pressure, particularly from the Chinese, to try and cultivate an environment in which the Iranians could come forward and agree to something. True. So, is the U.S. being stubborn, demanding that 400 plus kilogram of enriched uranium be handed over to the U.S.? Or is Iran being stubborn, not handing it over either to the U.S. or even Russia and China? Is there a middle ground possible, or do neither side want a solution right now? I think Iran sees this as an issue of sovereignty and national independence. Put yourself as an Indian in the position of the Iranians. For them, the right to enrich uranium for whatever purpose, and thus far they have not attempted to build a nuclear weapon, contrary to popular belief. But it is their right as a sovereign state to enrich uranium for other purposes, just as it's a sovereign right of India to maintain a nuclear capability. So I think from their standpoint, it's clear, it's unambiguous. This is about their sovereignty, their independence. What we're trying to do is force them to the table and accept the demands that are really Israeli demands. Our demands are actually not our own. These are Israel's demands. We are there because of Israel. We are fighting because of Israel, and that's something that the Iranians don't completely understand, but they recognize that. And so under the circumstances, I don't see these talks producing any results whatsoever. Okay, so is Iran as of now when it says, yes, we are willing to talk, but we are not willing to hand over 450 kilos of enriched uranium, or it's a right to enrich uranium. Are they stringing the U.S. closer to midterm elections, hoping that Trump will not be President Trump, will not be able to continue the conflict? No. And I think the reason I can say no is that Iran understands that President Trump enjoys the support of the U.S. Congress. Whatever individual members of Congress may say, the truth is that they are all supporting the Israel lobby and its agents in the United States. They have all signed on for the war on behalf of Israel. Frankly speaking, what happens in the fall is not terribly relevant in that sense. So why, if you're an Iranian, would you bother taking us seriously? We've lied repeatedly in the past about what we would or would not do. They have no expectation that we are going to be any different in the future. So I think from the Iranian standpoint, they're going to prepare to fight, and it's up to us to decide, do we want to continue the fight or not? And that's not going to be contingent on any talks or discussions with the Iranians. Okay. And when you look at the prosecution of battles so far, first the use of air power, and both Israel and the United States pounding Iran, the northern part of the country, the southern part of the country, and I'll come to Hezbollah and Lebanon in just a moment. And for the moment, sir, focusing solely on Iran, then the employment of naval power and the blockade beyond this, if the war, God forbid, were to start again, does the true buildup point to the use of boots on ground and taking control of Iranian oil at sea? But it's still not impossible. I think for the moment, the focus will be on air and missile attacks again, and then it will depend upon whether or not we think we're having any effect. I mean, the more we look at the damage inflicted on Iran to this point, the less convinced we are that this air and missile campaign is working. So the real issue is if you're going to use ground forces, you also have to commit large numbers of air and missile attacks to protect the ground forces inside the Persian Gulf. That means you have to defeat Iranian air defenses as well as defeat their strike weapons. That's extremely difficult. But we have several thousand troops. They are now organized and assembled in the region. They could be used to seize islands. Frankly, I think it would change nothing strategically in the grand scheme of things, because ultimately Iran can control that strait whether or not it has any Iranian troops or naval forces present. They have strike weapons, strike systems all over the country that we have failed to identify and we have failed to stop, and those can strike at any time at anything moving through the strait. In addition to that, I don't think the blockade is very effective. We're sitting roughly 300 to 500 miles south of the Persian Gulf. Why? Because we're afraid that the ships will come under attack and could be damaged or sunk. So again, I think we're at a crossroads, you might say. Do we resume the attacks and hope for a better result this time? Or do we finally conclude that the attacks are not going to fundamentally change anything inside? I can't answer that because Gussians are in the White House. If we knew that, then it would be a more interesting interview. It still is a very interesting interview. But let me put this to you, that in case U.S. realizes that air and missile attacks are not working, the naval blockade is not working. Would this indicate that Iran has been able to beat back the world's biggest air power, naval power, economic power? Iran's prestige will increase, America's prestige will decrease, and this will have huge ramifications for the region and the world. Absolutely, without question. I think we can argue that we have the wrong force in the wrong place at the wrong time for the wrong mission. You're looking at a World War II style fleet and air forces trying to attack a 21st century country that is a virtual fortress surrounded by mountains half the size of India with 93 million people. They have invested very heavily in underground facilities and in the ability to launch missiles and unmanned systems at will against any target within, say, 500 to 1,000 miles of Iran. That's proven to be a very powerful defense, a defense that we cannot easily overcome. So, yes, that would be embarrassing, and it would be disappointing to people. But on the other hand, if we were to press ahead with this and then fail completely, we would have exhausted our stocks of precision-guided missiles, precision munitions, but we would also look ridiculous in the eyes of the world. And remember, the longer we drag this out, the more that we insist on attacking Iran, the more damage we do to the global energy complex. We're doing damage to you in India. Absolutely. We're doing damage to our friends in Japan and Korea. This is outrageous. And that's something that the president needs to consider. It would be very smart of him to say, look, we probably cannot go further because if we do, we'll do more damage to the world that we do not want to inflict. And on humanitarian grounds, I, the president, have decided to disengage and withdraw our forces. We'll have to find another way to resolve our differences with Iran. And dear Miss and Shu, and the problem is there is a third party in all of this. That third party is Israel. And the Israelis have not said anything except this morning. I saw the defense minister of Israel argue that Iran must be destroyed. That's his position. He reiterated that very completely and carefully. So I think at this stage, the question is, will Mr. Trump simply tell Israel we've gone far enough? In fact, we've probably gone too far. It's in the interest of the global economy to stop. Or is he going to continue to take orders from Israel? Will it be loss of prestige, not just for the United States, but the world order would change in the region? Iran would emerge as a supreme power, charging $2 million per ship, whether it's Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or Qatar or Iraq. They will all have to pay. Right now, I'm told the negotiations that happened between Oman and Iran was for the joint control of the strait. But either ways, the Gulf region would be subservient to Iran. Would it? Well, I think that's absolutely true, except that I would point out that this is a point in time where if we were to disengage, the world's great powers need to meet. They need to develop a convention similar to the Montreux Convention that was developed in 1926 for the Daneils for the Bosphorus. Turkey ended up, despite having lost the war in World War I, Turkey ended up responsible for that strait, and that made sense since the Turks had most of the coastline. Yes, Iran controls most of the coastline, so it makes sense that Iran would ultimately end up in a responsible position. If India, China, Russia, and other great powers were willing to sit down and hammer out such a solution, then I think Iran would behave as a normal state within the broader framework of the international community. But right now is under threat from us. And as long as Iran is under threat from us, they're going to do whatever they must to survive. But wouldn't Russia and China, of course, certainly not India, but Russia and China just wait for America to spend more of their precision-guided bombs, spend the more of their arsenal, use up their arsenal, become weaker. China would become stronger in the Taiwan Strait, and in that region, Russia would be stronger, and they would wait for U.S. power to wane, just spend their power in this pointless war, as you point out, in Iran. I think Russia and China have already grown stronger as a result of this war. The Russians are making somewhere in the vicinity of 250 billion more money right now than they've made in the past from oil alone. The Chinese very much want an end to this, however, because ultimately this is bad for commerce. This is bad for business. This drives down living standards. It destroys prosperity. I think we have to be careful not to assume that Russia and China necessarily want the war to continue. I don't think they do. I think we should end the war for the reasons that I've already cited, and I think the president should do that. But the president is committed to Israel, and the Israelis want this war to continue until, in their estimation, the Iranian state is destroyed. I don't think that's the outcome. I don't think that will happen, and I think the region will explode if this continues. I think you will see Egypt and Turkey both become co-belligerent if this war continues much longer. This would be a disaster for the region, a disaster for the world, but I don't know what is happening in the White House. I wish I did. It's already a disaster for the world, as you very rightly point. It'll just go from bad to worse. But Colonel McGregor is the ultimate aim of the United States to take control of Iran oil, first Venezuela, and now Iran. Just have the capacity, whether they do it or not, have the capacity to choke oil supplies to China. Is that the aim? Is that feasible? China can choke rare earth material supply to the U.S. U.S. wants to have a counterbalance to China. Well, President Trump will visit China, I think, in another several weeks. The meeting has set between him and President Xi. I don't think President Trump wants to walk into that meeting and essentially say, we've done everything we can to harm China. Now let's sit down and talk. So I don't think that's the goal. I think there are people in Washington and in many parts of the world that think that somehow or another, if China is harmed, it will be good for us. I don't see any evidence for that. We are all part of a global economy right now. We are all part of a global energy complex. Prices in the United States are rising. Inflation is running away. We have serious problems with our banking system and liquidity. I mean, I could go on and on. Yes, none of this is necessarily good for us. So I think that while some people talk in those terms, the truth is no. We need China, and China needs us just as we need India, and India needs us. We are part of a larger community. So no, I don't see any benefit to harming China, and I think President Trump is enough of a businessman that he recognizes at this point that it doesn't make much sense. However, having all of that, you're still back to Israel. What does it command? And will we continue to do whatever Israel tells us to do? Yes. So let's for a moment talk about what's happening right now between Israel and Hezbollah. I'll come back to this issue of what's happening at the Strait of Hormuz in just a moment, because U.S. brokered a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon today. Hezbollah targeted Israeli defense forces. There was a drone attack when a Kazwak, I think there was a medical evacuation that was going on. That's the time a drone attack took place. In your view, would this lead to more escalation? Because apparently Israel has also issued some kind of a deadline for people even north of Latatani River to clear another 57 kilometers. Israel remains committed to the Greater Israel Project, which means that millions of people living in southern Lebanon on the West Bank inside Gaza are compelled to leave their homes or be killed. This is unacceptable. The world opposes this. The United Nations opposes this. Russia opposes it. China opposes it. We are the ones backing Israel in this unfortunate campaign. Israel has failed to destroy Hamas. Israel has failed to destroy Hezbollah. I think we need to come to terms with the reality that little Israel on its own cannot achieve any of these aims. They can only do what they do as long as we support them in this broader regional war of conquest for Israel. I just don't know that we can continue that much longer because it simply is not in our national strategic interest. But again, the president has the support of Congress to do that. And I don't think they realize yet how profoundly damaging all of this is to us, to our reputation, to our credibility, and ultimately to our economy. Colonel McGregor, with the ceasefire scheduled to expire, there are reports, again, these are reports in the Western media, that speak of preparations for a total war. What is your reading? One of this word total war, and what could be the trigger that could lead to a U.S.-Iran confrontation, direct confrontation or military confrontation, and your view in coming days or weeks, or could it be stalled for months? Well, for Iran, and I would argue also for Israel, this is already total war. So nothing new in that. The question is, what do we do? Where do we fit in? And we're back to where we started. The president has to sit down and carefully consider all of the interests of the United States, as well as our partners around the world, in order to make a decision that makes sense from the standpoint of the global economy and the global energy complex. We are staring at 2 to 5 years of recovery for the damage that has already been done. We can go through that in detail if you want at some point, but I think it's pretty clear to any of the global analysts, it'll take 2 to 5 years to recover. If we resume this war and we go in and continue to try and destroy Iran, Iran has promised to counterstrike, and those strikes will land on the west coast of the Persian Gulf and completely eliminate the remaining oil infrastructure in all of the Gulf states. That means it'll be 10 years or more, and perhaps maybe never, that we will see recovery in the Persian Gulf. Yes, Iran's threat, and it's a big threat. Iran says for every one oil well of Iran destroyed, they will destroy 4 in the region. And that's a huge threat from Iran's side, trying to prevent an escalation or sending out a very clear message. And so far as you know, better, sir, in your military analysis, whatever Iran says, it has done that in measure for measure that be seen as escalation, or just measure for measure in your view, sir. Absolutely, I think we can rely on the Iranians to do what they say. They've demonstrated that conclusively. And I go back to my hope that Prime Minister Modi will become more active in the process of bringing this war to a close. India is now a key component of the global economy and a great power. It needs to assert its influence regardless of its disputes with other countries. This is now about global economic health and survival. And I think that's where Prime Minister Modi needs to step in. And I think if he does, he's going to have a huge impact because his position is viewed as extremely important to the United States. This is why I keep saying all of these leaders need to make it clear to Donald Trump what is at stake and what they want him to do. And I think the answer is we want to solve this problem, but it has to be solved at the negotiating table. Military power will solve nothing. All military power can do is destroy more infrastructure and more lives. There's 67 million people right now living in the area surrounding the Persian Gulf on the west side. Millions of those people will have to leave. If they don't leave, they'll die because they will not have power. There will be no ability for them to survive and sustain themselves. They will not have food. They will not have water. We could go on and on. Is this what we want? Is this what we want? I don't think this is what the world wants. I don't think it's in our interest. So hopefully someone like Prime Minister Modi can make this very clear to President Trump that will help him make the right decision. But tell me this. So What is it that India can do which would be different from what Oman has already tried? And, okay, Pakistan may have been, as Iran says, as their lawmakers say, Pakistan may have been too close to the United States of America, or Pakistan, as many argue, may be more interested in promoting its image, whitewashing its own image of being a state sponsor of radical Islamist terror. But Oman went into these negotiations with a very clean hand. What is it that India can do which would be different from what Oman has already done? I think Prime Minister Modi is not really in the business of negotiating an end to this and mediating disputes. What I think Prime Minister Modi needs to say is that he represents 1.4 billion people on the Indian subcontinent, and that his concern is preeminently not just for them, but for the global economy. And he has to make it clear to President Trump what the ramifications are of continuing this war, and make it clear that if this continues, India will not be a strategic partner for the United States. India is going to seek strategic cooperation elsewhere because it's a matter of life and death for India, as it is for China and Russia and Iran, Turkey, and many, many other countries. Europe in particular is suffering terribly as a result of this energy crisis. I just don't think that President Trump has fully grasped the extent of the disaster that this war has created for the rest of the world. We're too myopically focused on just Iran, and Iran is going to survive. I think that's clear. That's the point. We need to come to terms with that reality. I completely take your point there, sir. But should the United States proceed with further strikes or even continue to maintain the blockade? What would be the immediate impact, and what would be the strategic impact of this move for the region, for the oil markets, for alliances, and for the world? Sir, in the interest of the global economic community, in the interest of the global energy complex, the blockade that we've established should end, and end immediately. We have an interest in moving energy from the Persian Gulf to the rest of the world. It's going to take us months to recover from the stoppage and to get millions and millions of barrels of oil back on the market, but more important, to ship them and all the petroleum products that are based on them. So I think he has to end that blockade as soon as possible. Whether or not he likes it doesn't make any difference. He's no longer dealing exclusively with the Iranian government. He's doing something that is in the interest of the global community. That's where he needs to focus at this point. So, step number 1, end the blockade, suspend any further military action, and decide how you want to press forward. And I think the only way to press forward is at the negotiating table. And I think that President Trump, if he turns to others, will have plenty of help with that. Okay. And what is your reading of reports, though? These are claims by analysts that Iran is able to beat this blockade by sending its dark free tankers from the Iranian territorial waters to the Pakistani territorial waters, and Pakistan is playing all sides here. Of course, I mean, there's no doubt about it. But are we expected to police the world? I don't think so. And the other point is the Iranians are going to do whatever they need to do to survive. That's very clear. We shouldn't be surprised by any of that. What we should be interested in doing is returning to a status quo that is fair and just and profitable for everyone. President Trump talks about that frequently. He says we can all get rich together. Well, right now we're all getting poor together, and that needs to stop. And your reading of the current peace talks in Russia, the dialogue with Oman, the joint control of Strait of Hormuz that Iran is speaking of, Iran wants the U.S. out of West Asia region. Clearly, U.S. will not want this. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Remember that we've been there for a very long time. The real question is, why were we there? Well, we promised to protect the states in the Persian Gulf, not just from Iran, but from virtually any potential adversary. We've demonstrated very conclusively that we cannot do that. Technology has changed. Warfare has changed. We cannot shoot down thousands of incoming missiles. We cannot stop tens of thousands of unmanned aircraft. We don't have the capacity. It's time for us to admit that the world has changed. Secondly, we can't afford to have large numbers of troops forward in other people's countries, and putting them there simply puts them at risk unnecessarily. So I think the old world is past. The old world order is past. I wrote an article on this, and this is the reverse of 1492. Things are now moving in Asia's direction, in the direction of Central Asia and Greater Asia. We need to come to terms with this. Not view it as something dangerous, but view it as an opportunity for greater commerce, trade, and cooperation. Washington hasn't figured that out yet, but I think they will. So reports are just coming in. Am I reading it right now? Iran has offered to open the Strait of Hormuz. They want America to lift the blockade. Now, is this becoming a classic chicken and egg situation? Iran says America should open the blockade first, then they'll open the Strait of Hormuz. In the past, when they offered to open, America refused to remove the blockade, and Iran looks at that as loss of faith. Sir, listen, I agree with your assessment. This is very silly. This is nonsensical at this point. We should be the adult and shouldly announce that we are disengaging. We are pulling away from this blockade. We will no longer stop and search vessels. And by the way, you know, we very stupidly searched some vessels all the way in the Strait of Malacca. The last thing that we want to do at this stage is widen the war. But frequently states do that. They widen the war to conceal their defeat and hope that by widening the war, they'll somehow achieve success. That's not going to work in the Strait of Malacca. We need to be interested and be a strategic partner for everyone and understand that all of these choke points, all of these waterways must remain accessible and open. We can demonstrate that by acting unilaterally and simply announcing we have reconsidered, we are ending the blockade. I think that would improve things dramatically. Now, it's not going to satisfy the Israelis who seem to want the complete and total destruction of the Iranian nation and people. I don't support that. I don't think President Trump really wants that, despite some of the stupid remarks that he's made in that connection. And that is not in the interest of the world. As you know, just as India is a core civilizational state, so is Persia, and I will let that be the last word on this part of the show. Colonel McGregor, as always, such a pleasure talking to you. Let's hope, your sane words are taken by the paths that be and sanity prevails. Mary, thanks for joining me, sir. Thank you.